This might seem like a little bit of a jump. We're going from the sort of the 14th and 15th century up to the 18th and 19th, but it is actually very much thematically linked, both in terms of the work I'm about to talk to you about was based in the National Archives UK, but also it is thematically linked in the sense that this is also about English government in Ireland, about the mechanics of government and administration. The work that I want to talk to you today is part of a larger research strand. If you've checked out that great booklet that Peter and many others on the team have put together from that QR code you were given on your sheet, you'll be able to learn more about the strand that we're going to be working on for the next couple of years, which is called Rumour, Riot and Rebellion, which is basically a reconstruction of the records of the Irish Chief Secretary's office in the late 18th and early 19th century. And this work is part of that larger strand. Now, the Chief Secretary's office, I mean, it's a fairly innocuous name, but the Chief Secretary, there's always been a primary or Chief Secretary for the Governor of Ireland, whether that's a Lord Deputy or Lord Lieutenant. But by about the mid-18th century, the Chief Secretary's office had actually become a distinct agency, a permanent bureaucracy overseeing the administration in Dublin Castle. And that administration in the 18th century was growing. The documents contained in the Chief Secretary's office, we know from records like Herbert Wood's Guide to the Irish Public Records from 1919, were incredibly varied and incredibly rich. The Chief Secretary's office, I mean, I always refer to this, the joke is, if any of you remember that TV series, Yes, Minister, the office into that is the Office of Administrative Affairs. It's administrators administrating other administrators. And the Chief Secretary's office is very much that. It's overseen, it's sort of executive oversight of other government departments. It's the main bridge between what's going on in Dublin Castle and what they're reporting back to their masters in London. So you get an awful lot happening in a single office. This is a page from Wood's Great Guide, and it gives you some sort of sense, if you go and explore this, the variety of material that they talked about. In trying to reconstruct the records of this office, we've focused in on a couple of series, a couple of categories of documents contained within it, and also a couple of themes. And we'll be talking to you about that today. One series in particular stands out: departmental letters and official papers. Again, it's a fairly innocuous sounding title, but if you actually look at what some of the sub-series are, there's 27 sub-series, giving you some sense of how big this thing is. It goes everything from ammunition to emigration to quarantines and prisons. It's fairly diverse. It picks up on some of the big stories in this period. The period 1760 to 1830, it's sort of that first sort of great wave of Atlantic revolutions, from the first stirrings of American independence in the 1760s, through the sort of the heyday of the French Revolution in the 1790s, through to the wars for independence in South America in the 1820s and 30s, and of course some very momentous changes within Ireland in that same period as well. Now, particularly when we look in this series, one particular sort of sub-series really stood out to me. This is correspondence between the Chief Secretary's office in Dublin Castle and the Home Office over in London. This is basically the highest level sort of correspondence you're going to get in that building. This is the leading figures of state in Ireland, the Chief Secretary, his immediate undersecretaries, the Lord Lieutenant himself, corresponding with the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the British Exchequer. That's the sort of people who are talking to each other in these series. It doesn't really get much more higher level than this. Now, the Home Office only came into being in 1782, and in many ways it's an equivalent to what the Chief Secretary's office was in Dublin. The Home Office had this huge remit for domestic affairs. I mean, it still largely does. And it's, again, a sort of a more permanent bureaucracy. It's definitely an enhancement in record keeping. And while we have lost an awful lot of the Chief Secretary's records due to the fire in 1922, the Home Office keeps the other half of a correspondence. Those letters being exchanged between Dublin and London, well, the letters going one way were destroyed in 22. The letters going the other way, including some copies of their responses, have been preserved over in the National Archives UK. Thanks to some very generous funding over the last 6 months by the Friends of the National Archives UK, an independent charity which encourages and supports research into the National Archives UK's collections, I've been able to carry out a little bit of work on one of these replacement series that's preserved over in London, in Kew. This is called the HO 100 series. Now, the HO 100 series, it's a big series. It's these bound volumes, as you can see on the left, of letters sent to the Home Office by Dublin Castle, by the Chief Secretary and his immediate underlings. It's a large series in that it's got 264 volumes. It's absolutely gargantuan. It covers the period 1782, when the Home Office starts, all the way up to 1840, when, for administrative reasons, a new series begins. It's not particularly highly catalogued. It's divided with descriptions for each volume. You'll get a year. Sometimes you'll get months of which month of the year it is, and it'll tell you whether it's civil affairs, military affairs, or some great sort of really helpful label like miscellaneous or private secret, which is, it sounds juicy, but it doesn't really tell you that much. When you crack open one of these volumes, I mean, each of these is about 400 items. 400 times 264, you're getting some sense of the scale here. These have been well used by scholars of Ireland in this period for many years now. It again is just a sense of scale. Actually getting into this and particularly navigating these volumes with only a little bit of descriptive help from the catalogue. And that's something we wanted to try and change, to crack open and enhance the usability of these really vital replacement sources for lost records from the Chief Secretary's office. So again, with the help of the Friends of the National Archives and supported by team members in the National Archives itself, such as Paul and his colleague Neil Johnson, I was able to do a discrete and limited work package over the last several months, which is I took a sample. I took 80 volumes, it's about a third of the series, for a particular period. The period I chose was 1793 to 1803. Now, I could have done a much more neater one, 1790 to 1800, but there are reasons for choosing those years. 1793 is the beginning of the French Revolutionary Wars. It's the passage of a very landmark Catholic Relief Act in Ireland, as well as the Militia Act. It covers the 1798 rebellion, the Act of Union, and it ends just on in the aftermath of Robert Emmet's failed rising in Dublin. So it captures an awful lot in that decade, in those 80 volumes. And what I've been doing is I've been going through these volumes and trying to create what I've called a selective calendar. Again, each of these volumes has as many as 400 items. I'm not going to be able to do a description for each individual item for each of those 80 volumes. That simply wouldn't have been feasible in the time I had. So what I've done is done a survey. And from each volume, I've given a general description of what the volume's like. Is it civil, military? What sort of topics are reoccurring? And I've chosen between 10 and 15 items per volume to give you a sample. Now, the sample has been chosen, it's subjective. It's what I think is important or interesting. It's also been chosen to give you some sense of the variety of material within it. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of some of the material that I've come up with. So, for instance, this is a HO 171. This is one of the great things we love to see on the right hand there, which is a copy of a letter that was sent to Dublin. So that original, which was sitting over in the forecourts, is destroyed. Because of the fastidiousness of Home Office officials, we have a draft of what was sent. So that sort of stuff is very high value, and we make a real effort to sort of record that. What we've been recording is just basic metadata. Who are the correspondents? Who's writing to who? What's the date? And then in scope and content, I'll give you sometimes a description, or if it's particularly juicy, I'll try to transcribe it in part or in full. We now have over 1,000 items with 150,000 words of searchable text from this sample, and there's some really great stuff within it. So this work on HO 100 is only one source of material for replacing the Chief Secretary's office records, but it really does speak to some of the bigger themes of that research strand. And these themes are rumor, riot, and rebellion. Those are the keywords. So government intelligence gathering, the maintenance of law and order, everyday crime, but also the suppression of insurrection and the prevention of rebellion. These are sort of big themes in this period, and particularly in this decade, 1793 to 1803. So looking at the first one, rumor, British and Irish intelligence gathering. What really jumps out from these collections from the Home Office is actually how important Ireland was to a burgeoning intelligence state that was beginning to form within the Home Office. In many ways, it was a precursor to things like MI5 or the Special Operations Executive in the 20th century, a regularized bureaucratic method of gathering intelligence through spies and informers on domestic subversives. And for very obvious reasons, Irish radicals feature in that correspondence very, very heavily, particularly because of Irish radicals' links with revolutionary France and attempts at an invasion. So we really have some great stuff in terms of informers' reports, both informers in Britain, who the Home Office are passing their intelligence on to Dublin, but of course also the other way around. the sort of the spies and informers that are being solicited by officials in Dublin Castle, and you're getting sort of digests and summaries of their information sent over to London as regular reports. I'll give you a couple of examples of some of these. So first, on the left, one of the things that Dublin Castle did very well was it kept an eye on radical publications, pamphlets, handbills, publications from groups like the United Irishmen, and made sure to keep an eye on these. And there's an awful lot of this printed material being sent over to London. It's like a little mini library of what a radical might read in Dublin or Belfast in the 1790s. The one on the left, The Presbyterians of the Province of Ulster, is written by an anonymous author calling himself Common Sense, a reference to a pamphlet by Thomas Paine. It's fairly strong medicine, imploring Ulster Presbyterians to throw their lot in with Irish Catholics to sort of throw off the yoke of English tyranny. On the right, you have something that's even more interesting, in my opinion. These are extracts of letters. It's a digest, a summary of information that Dublin Castle has got by 1795 of a group calling themselves the Defenders. They're an agrarian Catholic protest group that originally come out of Armagh, but they quickly spread through Ulster and South Leinster. It even includes some very interesting items, such as descriptions of materials being passed on by some of their informers. They actually turn a Catholic friar, Friar Phillips, sort of infiltrates the Defenders and passes on this, which is a really odd thing. He describes that the Defenders have a secret pass that they show each other. It's like a printed card with very ornate, unusual insignia, and he describes it here. And I could go through and describe it, but in another archive I actually found a picture of it, which is even weirder. It's truly bizarre, a mix of sort of revolutionary and Masonic imagery. It's the type of stuff that when you sort of pops in an archive to you, it really is sort of finding like gold dust. Now, aside from these obvious things like intelligence gathering, political subversion, everyday law and order is also a big theme. The Chief Secretary's office in this period and going into the 19th century had a general remit for law and order, as did the Home Office, and things like transportation of prisoners, the maintenance of prisons and jails, the use of military and militia and sort of extra legal procedures to put down subversion and riots are recurrent topics. So again, give you some examples of printed materials that we found in HO 100, a proclamation from a Lord Lieutenant, a common enough thing in the 18th century, and a printed item from the Grand Jury of the County of Monaghan. The Grand Juries were an organization, the basic unit of local law enforcement and administration that Dublin Castle is constantly in sort of dialogue with in this period. So that's particularly interesting. We also have this. I don't know if I'm running out of time. I'll give you a rush through this one. But anyway, this is Reverend William Jackson. He was a spy sent by revolutionary France. He was a clergyman to sort of suss out whether Ireland was sort of open to a French invasion. And he made contact with several leading United Irishmen, including Theobald Wolfe Tone. Unfortunately, Jackson was compromised. The government knew all about him from the start. He's arrested. Several of the people he's talked to in Dublin are in hot water, and he's put on trial. And this document on the right is a report from the Chief Secretary, from Thomas Pelham, saying that, yeah, we put him on trial for treason. He was found guilty, and when the verdict was read out, he swallowed something out of a bottle that was on his person. It was poison. He died in the dock. He probably didn't have much of a chance of getting off. His legal representation was John Philpott. It was Leonard McNally, who was actually working for government, so government knew his defense. So that's a recurring issue as well in HO 100, sort of government's use of state prosecutions, and it's sort of strategizing with London on how it will sort of engage in those. Moving on to obviously the juicy stuff, rebellion, from the appearance of the French fleet in Bantry Bay at the end of 1796 to the Great Rebellion of the year 1798, a rebellion that killed somewhere in the region of 20,000 people in only a couple of months, all the way to Robert Emmet's failed rising in 1803. HO 100 gives you first-hand accounts, key insights into policy making, but also reportage of the events, of battles in 1798, of interrogations of prisoners, of confiscated correspondence and documents from radicals and captured rebels. It's one of the richest sources for studying 1798 and 1803, with perhaps one exception. Now, this is a great one. This is actually an account of fighting in Wexford, the outbreak in early June. This item will be on the curated collections page for the Home Office in Ireland. It even includes a little map of some of the main sites in sort of the Carlow-Wicklow border, including New Ross, where a battle is just about to be waged. We also have some very visually appealing stuff. Again, confiscated items, such as the right. This is a sort of a letter of service given to General Humbert, a French general who landed in Connacht in Mayo in late 1798. He surrendered, he wasn't successful. All his documents were captured by Dublin and were returned to London, or sent on to London. On the left, you have a military map of the south coast showing sort of the main military outposts in case of a return invasion. So some really rich stuff here. I'm sorry if I'm running through, but you'll have a chance to look at all these. Some of these are also in a gallery that's part of the curated collections page, so you can explore this at your leisure. So going forward, this is just a sample of the work we've been doing on HO 100, which is only one replacement source, albeit, as I hope I've conveyed, a very key one. Going forward, we're going to be using this as a basis for an enhanced understanding of the Home Office's collections of Irish papers, future work we can do on it, including an archival history. How were these documents produced? What's the internal sort of logic of it? But it's also, the main thing we're looking into doing is to integrating what I've just shown you into a much larger, more expansive take on other sources for Chief Secretary's materials. And again, I'm not going to prey on your time too much, but I'll just give you a quick hint of some of what those other sources are. I'm currently based in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, where I'm the embedded researcher, and Prony has already delivered some really great material for key Chief Secretary's Office collections, private papers of Chief Secretaries and Lord Lieutenants. Sarah Hendricks was earlier talking about how some politicians and officials sometimes think of public records as their own. They take them off as private documents. Well, that's been to our benefit. People like Lord Castlereagh or Sir George Macartney in the 1760s kept an awful lot of what were essentially official documents, and we now have them, and more of those are coming on stream in the next couple of months. We also have a great and growing collaboration with the National Archives of Ireland, including two very key sources. I said to you that HO 100 was probably the best source for studying the 1798 rebellion, with one exception, which is the Rebellion Papers, contained up in National Archives UK, and its successor series, the State of the Country Papers. And we're going to be looking at those and ways to integrate those into a Chief Secretary's Office project going forward. National Archives of Ireland also contains finding aids. These were aids which, as we heard earlier from Jessica, which were in the record house at the front of the building that wasn't destroyed in 1922. The fire break actually preserved these. Now, these aren't the original documents. These were sort of guides to how you could use them when they still existed, but they now give us a great insight into the internal administration and filing system of the Chief Secretary's Office. So we're actually quite confident that with such a great option of replacement sources from multiple different repositories and some key insights to the documents that we're trying to replace, we can actually make a really good attempt at reconstructing the Chief Secretary's Office of Ireland. All right, I'm going to pass it back on to Zoe. Cheers.